Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, January 29, 2025. Health and Human Services Secretary nominee Robert F. Kennedy Jr. tells the Senate Finance Committee that he is not anti-vaccine. He says he's pro-safety. He's also asked about his advocacy for promoting good nutrition to bring down the rates of chronic disease and reduce healthcare costs, on abortion and whether he still holds the pro-choice views he's held in the past, and Medicaid reform. White House Budget Office rescinds a freeze on federal grants and loans, but says the president's executive order limiting money for such programs as diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, is still in effect. We'll hear from President Donald Trump and the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Also, reaction to the White House offer to most federal workers to take a buyout with 8 months' pay. President Trump and Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia speak on that. Federal Reserve holds interest rates steady, and Fed Chair Jerome Powell is asked about President Trump saying he'll be demanding lower interest rates. President Donald Trump signs his first bill into law, the Lake and Riley Act. It requires detention of undocumented immigrants accused of theft-related crimes. And the president says he's signing an executive order for the Pentagon to prepare Guantanamo Bay, the U.S. military facility in Cuba, to detain 30,000 criminal illegal aliens. Senate confirms Lee Zeldin as EPA administrator by a vote of 56-42, with 3 Democrats joining Republicans in voting yes. And the Senate Judiciary Committee approves Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi on a party line vote, sending that to the full Senate. Story from NBC News. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appeared before senators Wednesday for his first confirmation hearing as President Donald Trump's nominee for Health and Human Services Secretary, facing a grilling from Democrats on his views on vaccines and abortions. Kennedy sought to defend himself in his opening statement from the expected lines of questioning, prompting a brief eruption from a protester in the gallery. Kennedy said, "News reports have claimed that I am anti-vaccine or anti-industry. You are," the person yelled before being ushered out of the chamber. Kennedy continued, "I am neither. I am pro-safety. I worked for years to raise awareness about the mercury and toxic chemicals in fish, but that doesn't make me anti-fish. All my kids are vaccinated, and I believe vaccines have a critical role in health care." That was from the NBC News article. Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, ranking member of the Finance Committee, asked the nominee about vaccines.
In your testimony today under oath, you denied that you were anti-vaccine. But during a podcast interview in July of 2023, you said, quote, "No vaccine is safe and effective." In your testimony today, in order to prove you're not anti-vax, you note that all your kids are vaccinated. But in a podcast in 2020, you said, and I quote, "You would do anything, pay anything to go back in time and not vaccinate your kids." Mr. Kennedy, all of these things cannot be true. So, are you lying to Congress today when you say you are pro-vaccine, or did you lie on all those podcasts? We have all of this on tape, by the way.
Yeah, Senator, as you know, because it's been repeatedly debunked, that statement that I made on the Lex Friedman podcast was a fragment of the statement. He asked me, and anybody who actually goes and looks at that podcast, and we'll see this. He asked me, are there vaccines that are safe and effective? And I said to him, some of the live virus vaccines are. And I said, there are no vaccines that are safe and effective. And I was going to continue for every person. Every medicine has people who are sensitive to them, including vaccines.
Right. So
he interrupted me at that point. I've corrected it many times, including on national TV. You know about this, Senator Wyden, so bringing this up right now is dishonest.
Let's be clear about what you've actually done then, since you want to deny your statements. For example, you have a history of trying to take vaccines away from people. In May of 2021, you petitioned the Food and Drug Administration to not only block Americans from having access to the COVID vaccine, but to prevent any future access to the life-saving vaccine. Are you denying that? Your name is on the petition.
We brought that petition after CDC recommended the COVID vaccine without any scientific basis or 6-year-old children. Most experts agree today, even the people who did it back then, that COVID vaccines are inappropriate for 6-year-old children who basically have a zero risk from COVID. That's why I brought that lawsuit. I don't want to, I want to emphasize
Mr. Kennedy, the facts, the facts.
The committee will be in order. And to the audience. Hold on for a second, Mr. Kennedy. To the audience. Comments from the audience are inappropriate and out of order. And if there are any further disruptions, the committee will recess until the police can restore order. Please follow the rules of the committee. Mr. Kennedy, you may proceed.
I also want to point out that your recitation of what happened in Samoa is absolutely wrong, and you know it's wrong, and you know it's wrong.
We'll get to that in a moment. Right now, we're talking about the petition that you filed to block Americans from having access to the vaccine and to prevent any future access to the vaccine. Those facts are on the record. My third question to you is, you made almost $5 million from book deals, mostly promoting junk science. In 2021, in a book called The Measles Book, you wrote that parents had been, quote, misled into believing that measles is a deadly disease and that measles vaccines are necessary, safe, and effective. The reality is measles are in fact deadly and highly contagious, something that you should have learned after your lies contributed to the deaths of 83 people, most of them children, in a measles outbreak in Samoa. So my question here is, Mr. Kennedy, is measles deadly, yes or no?
The death rate from measles historically in this country in 1963, the year before the introduction of the vaccine, was 1 in 10,000. Let me explain what happened in Samoa. In Samoa in 2017 or 2015, there were 2 kids who died following the MMR vaccine. And the vaccination rates in Samoa dropped precipitously from about 63% to the mid-30s, so they've never been very high. And in 2018, 2 more kids died following the MMR vaccine, and the government of Samoa banned the MMR vaccine. I arrived a year later when vaccination rates were already below any previous level. I went there, nothing to do with vaccines. I went there to introduce a medical informatics system that would digitalize records in Samoa and make health delivery much more efficient. I never gave any public statement about vaccines. You cannot find a single Samoan who will say, I didn't get a vaccine because of Bobby Kennedy. I went in June of 2019. The measles outbreak started in August. Oh, clearly I had nothing to do with the measles. Not only that,
Mr. Kennedy,
Senator, not only that, if you let me finish, Senator.
You have had some time.
If you let me finish, Senator, if you let me finish, there are 83 people died. When the tissue samples were sent to New Zealand, most of those people did not have measles. We don't know what was killing them. The same outbreak occurred in Tonga and Fiji, and no extra people died. There were 7 measles outbreaks in the 13 years prior to my arrival.
I just would like to get my time back. The nominee wrote a book saying that people had been misled into believing that measles is a deadly disease. He's trying now to play down his role in Samoa. That's not what the parents say. That's not what Governor Green says. It's time to make sure that we blow the whistle on actually what your views are. At least we're starting.
We need to move
Senator,
on.
I support the measles vaccine. I support the polio vaccine. I will do nothing as HHS secretary that makes it difficult or discourages people from taking either of those
Anybody
vaccines.
who believes that ought to look at the measles book you wrote saying parents have been misled into believing that measles is a deadly disease. That's not true.
Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, ranking member on the Finance Committee, questioning Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the nominee for Health and Human Services Secretary. Senator Wyden also entered into the hearing record a letter from RFK Jr.'s cousin, Caroline Kennedy, opposing the nomination. Caroline Kennedy describing him as a predator who once enjoyed a perverse scene of despair and violence, by putting baby chickens and mice into a blender to feed his hawks. She's also accused of enticing other family members into addiction. And RFK Jr. did say today, while discussing addiction recovery services at the department, that he is a heroin addict and is in recovery. Back to the NBC News article about this confirmation hearing. At one point, Kennedy spoke about the rise in chronic diseases and ingredients in food, but also noted that his boss likes to eat a McDonald's cheeseburger and drink a Diet Coke. You should be able to do that, Kennedy said, to some chuckles at Donald Trump's penchant for eating fast food, but you should know what the impacts are on your family and your health. Again, that was from the NBC News article. The Finance Committee Chair, Mike Crapo, Republican of Idaho, asked the nominee about the role that better nutrition could play in improving the health of Americans and reducing the costs of providing health care.
Mr. Kennedy, you have emphasized the importance of nutrition in preventing and managing chronic disease, improving health outcomes, and reducing health costs. I share your interest in the relationship between our diet and our well-being. And if confirmed, I look forward to partnering with you on those efforts. Would you share with the committee why you are passionate about the nutrition-oriented disease prevention and what you have learned?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I had 11 brothers and sisters. I had dozens of first cousins. I was raised in a time where we did not have a chronic disease epidemic. When my uncle was president, 2% of American kids had chronic disease. Today, 66% have chronic disease. We spend zero on chronic disease during the Kennedy administration. Today, we spend $4.3 trillion a year. With 77% of our kids cannot qualify for military service. When I was a kid, the typical pediatrician would see one case of diabetes in his or her lifetime, 40 or 50-year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through her office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic. And the most recent data from NIH shows 38% of teens are diabetic or pre-diabetic. Autism rates have gone from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 1,500, depending on what studies you look at. In my generation today, 70-year-old men, 1 in 34 in my kids' generation. We've seen this explosion of autoimmune disease, of allergic diseases. This is not just an economic issue. It's not just a national security issue. It is a spiritual issue, and it is a moral issue. We cannot live up to our role as an exemplary nation, as a moral authority around the world, and we're writing off an entire generation of kids.
Health and Human Services Secretary nominee Robert F. Kennedy Jr. testifying before the Finance Committee, questions coming from the chair, Senator Mike Crapo, Republican of Idaho. National Catholic reporter writes, anti-abortion advocates have expressed concern but not opposition to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s nomination as HHS Secretary, despite his previous support for abortion rights. One notable exception has been former Vice President Mike Pence, who said in a statement that Kennedy would be the most pro-abortion Republican-appointed Secretary of HHS in modern history. Again, that's the article from National Catholic Reporter. RFK Jr. today said, in answering a question on abortion, that he will implement President Trump's policies.
I agree with President Trump that every abortion is a tragedy. I agree with him that we cannot be a moral nation if we have 1.2 million abortions a year. I agree with him that the states should control abortion. President Trump has told me that he wants to end late-term abortions, and he wants to protect conscience exemptions, and that he wants to end federal funding for abortions here or abroad. That's Title X. I serve at the pleasure of the president. I'm going to implement his policy.
RFK Jr., part of his answer to a question from Senator James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, at today's hearing. Senator Maggie Hassan, Democrat of New Hampshire, asked the nominee about his past support for abortion rights.
Now, let's go to something we agree upon. I am really heartened to see that one area where we agree on is on women's reproductive freedom. In your own words, it's not the government's place to tell people what to do with their bodies. You said that, correct? Yep. Mr. Kennedy, in 2023, you came to New Hampshire and said, quote, I'm pro-choice. I don't think the government has any business telling people what they can or cannot do with their body. So you said that, right?
Yes.
Yep. But you also said we need to trust the women to make that choice because I don't trust government to make any choices. You said that too, right?
Yes.
It is remarkable that you have such a long record of fighting for women's reproductive freedom, and really great that my Republican colleagues are so open to voting for a pro-choice HHS secretary. So, Mr. Kennedy, I'm confused. You have clearly stated in the past that bodily autonomy is one of your core values. The question is, do you stand for that value or not? When was it that you decided to sell out the values you've had your whole life in order to be given power by President Trump?
Senator, I agree with President Trump that every abortion is a tragedy, that we can't be a moral authority in this country.
Right, so, but that isn't what you said back in New Hampshire in 2023. My question is exactly when did you decide to sell out your life's work and values to get this position?
Senator, I agree with President Trump that every abortion is a tragedy.
So what you're telling us, just to be clear, because my time is limited, is that regardless of what you believe, regardless of what values you have, if President Trump tells you to do something, you're going to do it.
Senator Maggie Hassan, Democrat from New Hampshire, questioning Robert F. Kennedy Jr., nominated for Health and Human Services Secretary, Senate Finance Committee confirmation hearing today. Washington Times writing about the hearing, saying Kennedy didn't have a clear answer to questions that Senator Bill Cassidy, a potential swing vote, posed during the nominee's confirmation hearing. Mr. Cassidy, Louisiana Republican, wanted to know about Mr. Kennedy's views on reforming Medicaid, given that the GOP is looking for savings in the government-run health insurance program to help pay for President Trump's other policy priorities. Mr. Kennedy said he didn't have specific proposals for Medicaid changes, but he acknowledged the program isn't working for much of the low-income population it targets. Reporting from the Washington Times, here's the exchange between Senator Cassidy and nominee Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Republicans, again, are looking at ways to potentially reform Medicaid to help, pay for President Trump's priorities, but to improve outcomes. What thoughts do you have regarding Medicaid reform?
Well, Medicaid is not working for Americans, and it's specifically not working for the target population. Most Americans, like myself, I'm on Medicare Advantage, and I'm very happy with it. Most people who are on Medicaid are not happy. The premiums are too high. The deductibles are too high. The networks are narrow. The best doctors will not accept it in the best hospitals. And particularly, Medicaid was originally designed for a target population, the poorest Americans. It's now been dramatically expanded. And the irony of the expansion is that the poorest Americans are now being robbed. Their services have dramatically decreased, even though we've increased the price of Medicare by 60% over the last 4 years. The target population is being robbed.
With that
figure
said,
out other options.
Obviously, you've thought about that, and I appreciate that. What reforms do you recommend, again, that would improve services, I suppose, but also make it more cost efficient?
Well, President Trump has given me the charge of improving quality of care and lowering the price of care for all Americans. There are many things that we can do. What we want to, the ultimate outcome, I think, is to increase transparency, to increase accountability, and to transition to a value-based system rather than a fee-based system.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., nominated for Health and Human Services Secretary, questioned by Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana. You can find the full 3.5-hour Finance Committee confirmation hearing that we covered live on the C-SPAN networks at our video library at cspan.org. And on Thursday, the nominee will be before Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. It starts at 10 a.m. Eastern. You can follow that on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, which is free. About the last exchange you just heard, many news outlets pointing out that while Kennedy described Medicaid as being fully paid for by the federal government, the cost is split between federal government and states. And he said Medicaid premiums and deductibles are too high. The majority of Medicaid enrollees do not pay premiums or deductibles. And about Senator Cassidy, CNN's Manu Raju posting that Senator Cassidy, the swing GOP vote on Senate Finance, would not comment on RFK Jr. And told reporters he has previously weighed in on Kennedy's vaccine views and would not say more. He previously said that Kennedy was wrong on vaccines. This is Washington Today. Article from CNN, the White House Office of Management and Budget on Wednesday rescinded a memo that froze federal grants and loans and created widespread confusion this week. OMB Memorandum M-25-13 is rescinded. If you have questions about implementing the president's executive orders, please contact your agency general counsel. A new memo obtained by CNN reads, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said on X that while the earlier memo had been rescinded, the president's executive orders freezing foreign assistance and ending diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, for example, remain in effect. Those orders are more targeted than the trillions of dollars in aid that was frozen Monday night. Reporting from CNN. Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, the minority leader, spoke about this today at a news conference.
Today, we saw what happens when Americans fight back against disastrous policies. Americans made their voices heard. Donald Trump rescinded the OMB order. Now he should rescind the nomination of Russell Vought. When the Trump administration announced this awful directive on Monday night, we knew immediately it was short-sighted, disastrous, cruel, and dumb. It was clear then, as it is now, that the directive was given without any comprehension of what it actually called for, let alone the ramifications on literally hundreds of millions of Americans. And the American people are outraged from one end of the country to the other, and it is clear that President Trump and his minions are feeling the heat. Did President Trump know he was kneecapping cops and firefighters from purchasing literally life-saving equipment like bulletproof vests and breathing gear? Did President Trump know that he was destroying Puerto Rico's assistance program, leaving 1 million Americans hungry? Did President Trump know that he was essentially shuttering community health centers, rural hospitals, food pantries? If he didn't, Democrats made sure he learned it real quick. I told all of you this week the proposal was best described with the 3 C's: chaotic, careless, cruel. And Senate Democrats responded with 3 letters of our own: NFW. This should be a lesson to President Trump that following Russell Vought and Project 2025 is a loser. Russell Vought was the architect of Project 2025. He was the architect of the OMB memo. He will be the architect of more losses for President Trump if he keeps Vought on the team. There's no doubt about it, this memo was a catastrophe. And I assume President Trump will hold those behind this memo accountable, or he's going to get into more and more trouble if he follows their dictates.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, at a news conference on Capitol Hill. President Donald Trump today blamed the media for the confusion over which programs were frozen from the original OMB memo. Trump administration officials said programs that provide direct assistance to Americans, including Medicare, Social Security, student loans, and food stamps, would not be affected. President Trump also said his executive order has already led to identifying government waste.
There was a short-term pause or funding freeze on certain discretionary spending payments, such as government grants, only for us to quickly look at the scams, dishonesty, waste, and abuse that's taken place in our government for too long. As was explicitly stated, this in no way affected Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, or other entitlements that Americans depend on. I've made abundantly clear from the very first day that I ran from office, that was a long time ago now, that's 2015. If you think about it, I announced in 2015 and we won in 2016. We did very well in 2020, but we did really well just recently. And I'm restating right now to correct any confusion that the media has purposely and somehow, for whatever reason, created Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, have not been affected by any action we're taking in any way, shape, or form. We are merely looking at parts of the big bureaucracy where there has been tremendous waste and fraud and abuse. In that process, we identified and stopped $50 million being sent to Gaza to buy condoms for Hamas. 50 million. And you know what's happened to them? They've used them as a method of making bombs. How about that? We stopped an attempt to make an illicit payment for illegal alien resettlement. We canceled $181 million in DEI training contracts. This is just for the training of people in DEI, which has been terminated and completely terminated. And we paused $1.7 billion in unauthorized payments to foreign organizations, including stopping more than $40 million that was on its way out the door to the very corrupt World Health Organization, which has not done its job and not done it properly. We also blocked $45 million for diversity scholarships in Burma. 45, that's a lot of money for diversity scholarships in Burma. You can imagine where that money went. These were the types of payments, and many others. I could stand here all day and tell you things that we found, and we have to find them quickly because we want the money to flow to proper places. But these were the payments and types of payments affected by the temporary freeze, and the American people strongly support these efforts. I talked about it during the campaign, and they voted for us in record numbers.
President Donald Trump today at the White House. Washington Post fact-checker looked at the claim of $50 million for condoms in Gaza. It was first stated by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at yesterday's briefing, repeated, you just heard, by President Trump. And the Post gave it 4 Pinocchios, writing, on the face of it, Leavitt's statement that $50 million was going to be spent on condoms is preposterous. That figure is 3 times the yearly average spent by the U.S. government for the entire world. Moreover, neither she nor the State Department could provide documentation supporting the claim. The department identified a contractor that it claimed was distributing condoms in Gaza, but the organization says no U.S. money is involved. Another Washington Post article, a father worried about skyrocketing child care costs if he needs to return to the office full-time for his federal government job. A mother afraid of being fired while her husband, also a federal employee, searches for a new job of his own. A national park ranger concerned that park staff, already stretched thin, will be stretched even further if colleagues leave and openings go unfilled. They are among the thousands of federal workers caught in limbo amid a flurry of steps taken by the Trump administration to remake and shrink the ranks of the federal workforce, with an email blast Tuesday night from the Office of Personnel Management offering employees a chance to resign with pay through September 30th, the latest source of anger and confusion as they continue to do their jobs. The email gave those workers a February 6th deadline to decide whether they would take the buyout. That was the Washington Post. President Trump spoke about this offer today.
Just for clarification purposes, because it was incorrectly reported yesterday, we have informed the federal workforce, which they've looked to do for many years, that if they're working for the federal government, they must show up to the office on time and on schedule. We don't want them. We don't want them to work from home because, as everyone knows, most of the time they're not working, they're not very productive, and it's unfair to the millions of people in the United States who are in fact working hard from job sites and not from their home. As federal employees, they must meet a high standard. They're representing our government, they're representing our country. If they don't agree by February 6th to show up back to work in their office, they will be terminated, and we will therefore be downscaling our government, which is something that the last 10 presidents have tried very hard to do but failed. Most of the people we're talking about have not been going to their federal offices in many, many years, from even before COVID, but they have nevertheless been paid. Some have worked, some haven't worked, and most of the studies say that some have just gone through the motions. we may ask these people to prove that they didn't have another job during their so-called employment with the United States of America, because if they did, that would be unlawful. As you understand, a lot of people are getting paychecks, but they're actually working other jobs, so they'll have to prove that to us that they weren't. In any event, we're requiring them to show up to work or be terminated. We think a very substantial number of people will not show up to work, and therefore our government will get smaller and more efficient, and that's what we've been looking to do for many, many decades, frankly.
President Donald Trump today at the White House. FedWeek writes that the Deferred Resignation Program applies to all full-time federal employees except for military personnel of the armed forces, the U.S. Postal Service, positions related to immigration enforcement and national security, and any positions exempted by an employing agency. There are about 3 million federal government employees. Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, spoke about this on the Senate floor Tuesday night.
The federal employees received an interesting email at the end of the day today. I happen to have some fellows assigned to me who are not Senate employees, but they are executive branch employees, as most of us have, working in my office. And they received an email that said, from the administration, if you tender your resignation by next Friday, we will guarantee you payment through the end of September, whether or not you show up for work. So tender your resignation, and then, boy, it's just going to be a gravy train. You're just going to get paid for 7 months without working. The president has no authority to make that offer. There's no budget line item to pay people who are not showing up for work. This is a guy who made this promise to contractors again and again and again when he was a private business guy. Oh, come work for me on my casino. Come work for me in a hotel. We're going to do a handshake. We're going to do a contract. The contractor does the work and then finds out they get stiffed. So my message to federal employees who receive this is, yeah, the president has tried to terrorize you for about a week, and then gives you a little sweetheart offer. If you resign in the next week, we're just going to pay you for doing nothing for the next 7 months. Don't be fooled. He's tricked hundreds of people with that offer. If you accept that offer and resign, he'll stiff you just like he stiffed the contractors. He doesn't have any authority to do this. Do not be fooled by this guy. You were here before he was here, and you'll be here after he was here. Show up for work, be diligent, serve Americans every day, make their life better, answer their phone call, give them an answer, track down their constituent call. Don't be fooled by a fake offer that because he's terrorized you in the last week, it would be easy to just resign now and get a check for 7 months, because I can tell you that promise is worth nothing. And you will regret it just like these contractors regretted it who did work for this guy when he was a businessman.
Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia, on the Senate floor Tuesday night. More from the FedWeek article about this proposal. Federal agencies have the authority to offer buyouts for downsizing and restructuring since the last major workforce cutbacks during the Clinton administration, although the maximum of $25,000 has not changed since then. As a practical matter, most of those who have accepted buyouts in the past take them into retirement, having already been eligible or becoming eligible with an accompanying early retirement offer. In such cases, the payment goads someone to retire earlier than they had expected. That could prove to be the case again in the latest offer, with 15% of federal employees already retirement eligible. Reporting from FedWeek. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Tomorrow on C-SPAN Radio, tune in at 10 a.m. Eastern for the confirmation hearing of Tulsi Gabbard, nominee for Director of National Intelligence. On the C-SPAN Now app, listen at 9:30 a.m. Eastern as Kash Patel testifies at his confirmation hearing to be FBI Director. Also, at 10 a.m. on the C-SPAN Now app, catch the second day of testimony from the confirmation hearing of HHS Secretary nominee Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Stay connected to all of C-SPAN's programming anytime at cspan.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. The Federal Reserve, writes USA Today, paused its interest rate cutting campaign Wednesday and gave no signal it plans to lower rates again in the near term, amid uncertainty spawned by inflation and President Donald Trump's economic policies. The decision to hold rates steady at a range of 4.25% to 4.5% could mark the beginning of an extended respite as the Fed assesses the course of inflation and awaits details on Trump's trade and immigration plans. That was from USA Today. Fed Chair Jerome Powell spoke to reporters in Washington.
My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. The economy is strong, is strong overall, and has made significant progress toward our goals over the past 2 years. Labor market conditions have cooled from their formerly overheated state and remain solid. Inflation has moved much closer to our 2% longer-run goal, though it remains somewhat elevated. In support of our goals, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell opening up today's news conference at the Fed headquarters in Washington. ABC News writes that during a virtual address to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland last week, President Trump demanded a drop in interest rates after calling for a reduction of oil prices set by a group of nations known as OPEC, which includes Saudi Arabia. The prospect of low oil prices will enable the Fed to dial back its fight against inflation and bring down interest rates, Trump said. That was from ABC News. Reporter asked Fed Chair Powell about this.
Mr. Chairman, Steve Leisman from CNBC. Mr. Chairman, at a event in Davos, to Davos anyway, the president said he'll demand that interest rates drop immediately. So I guess I have a three-part question. Has the president done this to you? Has he made that demand? Secondly, what is your response to that? And third, what effect, if any, does a president making these kind of remarks have on policy? Thank you.
Three questions. I'm seeing it really as one question, though. So I'm not going to have any response or comment whatsoever on what the president said. It's not appropriate for me to do so. The public should be confident that we will continue to do our work as we always have, focusing on using our tools to achieve our goals and really keeping our heads down and doing our work, and that's how we best serve the public.
Can you just comment on whether he's physically communicated this demand to you?
I've had no contact. Thanks.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. President Donald Trump putting a statement on his Truth Social account. Because Jay Powell and the Fed failed to stop the problem they created with inflation, I will do it by unleashing American energy production, slashing regulation, rebalancing international trade, and reigniting American manufacturing. But I will do much more than stopping inflation. I will make our country financially and otherwise powerful again. The Fed has done a terrible job on bank regulation. Treasury is going to lead the effort to cut unnecessary regulation and will unleash lending for all American people and businesses. If the Fed had spent less time on DEI, gender ideology, green energy, and fake climate change, inflation would never have been a problem. Instead, we suffered from the worst inflation in the history of our country. That statement from President Donald Trump on Truth Social. Wall Street today, the Dow down 136, NASDAQ down 101, S&P down 28. President Donald Trump signed his first piece of legislation into law today of his second administration, the Laken Riley Act. AP writes the law is named for Laken Riley, a 22-year-old Georgia nursing student who went out for a run in February 2024 and was killed by Jose Antonio Ibarra, a Venezuelan national in the U.S. illegally. Ibarra was found guilty in November and sentenced to life without parole. The law mandates the detention and potential deportation of people in the U.S. illegally who are accused of theft and violent crimes before they've actually been convicted. Reporting from Associated Press, here's President Trump at the White House before he signed the bill.
To Laken's family, we will keep Laken's memory alive in our hearts forever, everyone's hearts. With today's action, her name will also live forever in the laws of our country, and this is a very important law. This is something that has brought Democrats and Republicans together. That's not easy to do. Laken did it. Laken did it. America will never, ever forget Laken Hope Riley. The vicious criminal who murdered Precious Lakin was an illegal alien member of the barbaric Venezuelan prison gang known as Tren de Aragua. He trespassed across our southern border in 2022 and was apprehended by Border Patrol, but under the cruel policies of the last administration, instead of being deported, as he should have been, he was released into the United States, as were millions of other people, many of them very dangerous people. And you see what we're doing, we're getting them the hell out of here.
President Donald Trump at the White House. There was one Senate Democrat in the audience from the 12 who voted for this bill, and that's John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, who put out a statement. I believe a secure border creates a more secure nation, and it's just common sense. I believe a stronger border is fully compatible with my commitment to immigration. I believe this nation is tired of leaders in D.C. prioritizing fighting over governing. President Trump, in his remarks, also previewed another executive order involving the Pentagon housing migrant criminals at the U.S. military base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
Today, I'm also signing an executive order to instruct the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security to begin preparing the 30,000-person migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay. Most people don't even know about it. We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. Some of them are so bad we don't even trust the countries to hold them because we don't want them coming back, so we're going to send them out to Guantanamo. This will double our capacity immediately, right? And that's a tough place to get out of. Today's signings bring us one step closer to eradicating the scourge of migrant crime in our communities once and for all. And it was just it's just an unforced error that we even have to be doing this. Now we need Congress to provide full funding for the complete and total restoration of our sovereign borders, as well as financial support to remove record numbers of illegal aliens.
President Donald Trump at the White House signing the Laken-Riley Act into law. President Trump's pick for Attorney General Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, was voted out of the Senate Judiciary Committee today in a party line vote, 12-10. Before that vote, the committee's leaders spoke. One topic they both raised was the 2020 presidential election. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, is the ranking member.
It is absolutely critical that any nominee for the position be committed first and foremost to the Constitution and the American people, not the president and his political agenda. Unfortunately, I'm unconvinced that Ms. Bondi shares my belief. She is one of 4 personal lawyers of President Trump that is already already selected for top positions at the Department of Justice. And she has echoed President Trump's calls for exacting revenge on political opponents. Ms. Bondi undermined our democracy by joining President Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. It appears she does not regret that decision, as she refused before this committee repeatedly during her hearing to acknowledge that President Trump actually lost the vote in 2020.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, Judiciary Committee ranking member. Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, the committee chair, also brought up this topic before the vote on the Pam Bondi nomination.
Several members of this committee characterized Ms. Bondi as an election denier. This is inconsistent with her own statements because on multiple occasions during her hearing, Ms. Bondi stated that President Biden was the president and that she, quote unquote, accepted the results. As I said during the hearing, questioning the results of an election does not make one an election denier. If this is the criteria by which we judge public officials, scores of Democrats, including some on this committee, are similarly situated. Minority Leader Schumer cast doubt on Senator Casey's loss to Pennsylvania just a few months ago. Hillary Clinton elected Democrats have called President Trump an illegitimate president and suggested the 2016 election was stolen Stacey Abrams and even some members of this committee suggested the 2018 Georgia governor's election was quote-unquote stolen. The attacks against Ms. Bondi on this point of a partisan double standard.
Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, Judiciary Committee chair, before the committee voted along party lines 12-10 to send the Pam Bondi nomination for Attorney General to the Senate floor. From Associated Press, former U.S. Senator Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, was sentenced Wednesday to 11 years in prison for accepting bribes of gold and cash and acting as an agent of Egypt, crimes his lawyer said earned him the nickname Gold Bar Bob. U.S. District Judge Sidney H. Stein in Manhattan announced the sentence after Menendez tearfully addressed the judge, saying he'd lost everything he cared about except for his family. Another AP story, billionaire financier Howard Lutnick, President Donald Trump's choice to lead the Commerce Department, said Wednesday that he would sell all of his business holdings within 90 days. Lutnick, head of the investment firm Cantor Fitzgerald, has complicated business dealings. His financial disclosure statement showed that he had positions in more than 800 businesses and other private organizations. Reporting from AP, tariffs and trade were large topics at today's hearing. Senator John Curtis, Republican of Utah, asked Howard Lutnick about China and the recent announcement of a breakthrough in artificial intelligence technology.
We talked a lot about this Chinese model that's been developed for artificial intelligence, and supposedly it's been done cheaper and better than the United States. Color me skeptical.
Well, it's easy to be cheaper if you steal it.
Right. And so my question is, how do we finally get to accountability for this? Because I want a really productive relationship with China, but as long as there's no accountability, we can't have that. How do you, in your role, how do we get to accountability on this? And then second, can we acknowledge this is TikTok on steroids, right? If we're worried about the influence of the CCP on America with TikTok, this is on steroids. Can you just address both of those quickly?
I think the first answer is reciprocity with China. How you treat us is how you should expect to be treated by us. I think we have let them off the hook for far too long. They treat us horrifically in China, and yet we let them ride roughshod over us here. That needs to end. I think the term reciprocity, which sounds fair, would show that they are treating us horribly. So that's the first step, I think, a good word for this administration to repeat endlessly. Reciprocity. Treat others the way they treat us.
It was earlier that, mentioned the Artificial Intelligence Safety Institute that's underneath you, and if that needs a new life or new legs, I'd love to work with the Senate and yourself to give you the tools that you need to do exactly that.
Senator John Curtis, Republican of Utah, questioning Howard Lutnick, nominated for Commerce Department Secretary at today's Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee hearing. C-SPAN also covered today's hearing with SBA Administrator nominee Kelly Loeffler before the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. You can find the video of all these hearings at our video library at cspan.org. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. We'll send you the stories making headlines in Washington every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.